This week, former US Vice President Al Gore will be in Melbourne for the Climate Reality Leadership Corps training session. The idea is to train climate scientists and non-government organisations to sell the issue of climate change to the public. And joining us now is communications consultant Brett Hoedt, who is one of the speakers at the event. Brett, welcome to the show. Tell us, how do you measure the success of the climate change PR campaign up till this day?
You could measure it in a positive way or a negative. I mean, in the positive, we've had climate change issues on the agenda now for literally decades, and that actually doesn't happen by accident. So that's a lot of work by a lot of communicators to keep that on the news agenda and make that a relevant issue for politicians. The climate movement, if you want to call it that, has certainly gathered an army, if you like, of supporters who are willing to change their own behaviour, are willing to vote in certain ways based on politicians' environment performance, if you like, and they're willing to take action online and sometimes even physically. So that's a positive. The negative, of course, is that the movement has failed to really inspire politicians to take the severe and strong actions that are required to address climate change. So it's a mixed report card.
And on that note, actually, last year's election result seems to be a mandate for Tony Abbott and his government to move away from a pricing mechanism on carbon. So therefore you'd think that things have really stalled, surely.
Yeah, it's certainly not a vote in favour of the current way of campaigning. But at the same time, feeling that there is an opposition to your point of view might inspire more people to join the movement. Politicians are very attuned to the electorate's whims and wishes and desires, and as long as mainstream Australians, or a percentage of them, continue to say, I'll vote on other issues as opposed to the environment, politicians are going to respond to that, particularly, of course, if they're in marginal seats.
Now, you do talk about the current way of campaigning. I wonder, we've been talking about Al Gore, an inconvenient truth. There was quite a few fear messages, wasn't it? I mean, that part of that was quite frightening, the prospects of what would happen to the world in that scenario under climate change. Do you think that fear message has been somewhat of a problem?
Look, certainly there are people who are climate sceptics or downright cynics who feel that the movement's been too quick to either make you feel guilty or scared, and adults don't generally respond to that well. Climate change and climate change action has got to be seen as an opportunity for business, an opportunity to literally clean the air. But of course, if we're saying that the worst impacts of climate change are yet to happen, well, I'd say, I'd point you to a report from the World Health Organization in March that said 7 million people around the globe, 7 million, died prematurely from air pollution. I mean, that's a staggering statistic. We've just had our hottest summer on record in Australia. We've had, I think, the warmest autumn ever. So the impacts are right here and right now. So I don't think we have to worry about terrible circumstances down the track. The here and now is quite bad enough to steer us to action.
But you spoke about those cynics or sceptics. Do you feel that that side of the argument is running a better public relations campaign than the group that you're going to be talking to this week?
Well, I work with a lot of sectors on a lot of issues, and environment is unique in that there is an organised and passionate opposition. No one argues against better mental health services or, aged services, but with the environment, the ante is certainly upped, and there's a very well organised, passionate, connected group in the community that wants things to stay pretty much as they are and sees the environment movement as perhaps urban and elitist and just a group of people who want to make life more expensive and complicated. So they're well connected, and there are large sections of the media that are very in tune with that sensibility and know that that sells newspapers and gets people to watch their TV shows. So they're well organised and well connected and well resourced, and frankly, in some ways, they're good at what they do.
Okay, so how do you counter that?
I think you counter that through events like Climate Reality. We've got 500 plus people from around the country and overseas. They've actually applied to be a part of the event. Over 1,000 people couldn't get in, so we could run this event several times over. And they're people from all walks of life. They're not all tree-hugging vegans by any stretch of the imagination. We've got people from banking and finance, people who wear suits to work, teachers, firefighters, environmentalists, all sorts of people, all walks of life. And they're getting a whole lot of training, skills and inspiration to go out into their local communities and spread the word about how climate change is impacting them in their local parts of the world. And I think that's very important. It can't just all be fought through media.
Okay, and do you see any parallels to the smoking campaign? Obviously, you spoke about environment having an opposition, but surely big tobacco was a pretty serious opponent as well. Do you look at that campaign and see how some of the campaigners have been successful in issues like plain packaging, for instance?
Sure. It's not the same, but it's similar, of course, and it's a great turnaround and probably unimaginable. If you woke up from a coma that you've been in for 30 years, you wouldn't believe that you can't smoke cigarettes at your desk, in public transport, at a restaurant, even at a pub. So we can pat ourselves on the back about changes in relation to road safety or smoking, but you've got to remember that a lot of those changes were from government, putting in legislation and enforcement. It was government that made smoking more expensive, more difficult to buy, less appealing to hold now, more difficult to smoke and enjoy. So government led the charge on that. So that's an example of government leading with some push from the public. Environment, however, is different, and it's the public broadly trying to drag government kicking and screaming into greater and more significant action.
Okay, it just finally, what's the first step in this big push that NGOs, for instance, and climate scientists are going to be making? How can they next week and in the months to come make some change?
Be willing to put your head above the parapet. Again, unlike other issues, there is a hostile reaction from people who have opposing views to anything towards the environment. So you've got to be willing and able to talk to media, talk to the public, talk in your workplace about environmental issues, and then cop some of the criticism that will come with that. And a lot of it's very personal and very aggressive. Some leading climate change campaigners have told me about the emails they receive, the phone calls they receive, the people who are willing to harass them in the street. And that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's actually true. It's a very heated debate. So you've got to get some courage and enter the debate.
Okay, Brett to Hoedt in Melbourne, thanks for your time.